Hi, my name is Roland Dupre, and we're with Susanne Davis, an author who has written a book called Gravity Hill. It's a fantastic book, and I welcome you here, Susanne.
Thank you so much, Roland. I am really thrilled to be here. I am very appreciative for what libraries do, holding communities together and giving books a place to live and stories. So thank you.
Thank you for coming. It's a really good book.
So I guess I'll just jump in and say a few words about the making of this book. It's been like the little engine that could. It's had, about a number of years of writing. And I will say that the book for me was very much a story of community. And the when I first started writing the book, the main character was the sort of driving engine of the book, sticking with the engine metaphor. And I started to get to know the character who had just a lot of sort of strong emotions, but I couldn't really understand initially what it was that was causing her to act in the ways that she was acting. And then after I got the first draft of the book done, I thought I understood the character. And then what I understood was how much the story was connected to her community and to the people in that community. And so I thought I might just start with reading you a just a very brief section from the near the beginning of the book, um, to just give you a tiny bit of context. The story is about this young woman whose brother is killed in a car accident with two other boys, and it appears that it's a drunk driving accident. And so she ends up giving up her college scholarship to stay home and help out on the family farm. And she really wants to try to clear her brother's name. And you'll see why when I read you this tiny section. And what she ends up discovering is, related to some more complications and decades of history in the town that we can talk about more a little later. So this beginning section is the start of the memorial service that's being held for the three boys. That night, the town held a memorial service at the Living Bible Church for the three boys. While the accident had happened a month earlier, families had been slow to coordinate the difficult service. The Hawkins pulled into the parking lot of the church, a small white building with cement steps, a black door, and a wooden cross on top, located in the town's industrial park above the river. The industrial park had been created on land polluted by the riverside textile mill. The mill had mysteriously burned down and left barrels of dye and solvents leaching into the ground. The illegally buried barrels had been discovered and removed. Now the town's only industry was the tire burning plant, which replaced the mill. From the Hawkins car, one could see white smoke, but not the plant itself. The parking lot was almost full, and Pastor James stood at the door waiting. The Hawkins were members of the church, or at least attended at holidays, which was more than the other two families. As Pastor James escorted them through the foyer into the room where he'd set up folding chairs, Jordan noticed two clumps of people standing in the back, looking uncomfortable and ill at ease. Only a few sat in chairs, including Mr. Z, a beloved elementary school teacher who was going above and beyond the call of duty, Jordan thought, since he'd already attended the private funeral for Clay. He'd always liked Clay, and his crumpled features told her just how terrible he felt about the whole thing. In the midst of these people, Jordan wished she could escape back to the fields. When would Pastor James get started? It was quarter past the hour. Finally, he stood and said, We come together tonight to remember Clay and Tim and Tony, all of whom died together in April. We come to pray for them and their families. At this point, he smiled at the Hawkinses first, and then at Tony Barbo's mother and father. Mr. Barbo wore a flannel shirt pulled tight around a swollen stomach, although the rest of him was skin and bone. Jordan remembered hearing that he was wasting away from cancer or drinking, and Mrs. Barbo leaned away from him toward the pastor. Tony's sister, Tina, stood beside her father, rubbing his shoulder with one hand and holding her toddler in her other arm. Pastor James gestured toward the Hawkinses. Sam and Diane helped me organize this memorial so we could come together as one family. He held up the big black Bible and opened it as if he were greeting a friend. I want to start out with this reading from 1 Corinthians. His voice sang out, "If I speak without love." Jordan caught just snatches of what he said as she looked at the people crying, hanging their heads, hiding their tears as if they'd done this too many times and were worn out by their grief. So the pastor goes on to his service and then he invites people to speak, and Jordan jumps up. She knew that if she didn't do this now, she never would. Her father squeezed her hand and she squeezed back. She reached into her pocket for a poem she'd found on the internet. It contained someone else's grief, and when she'd first read it online, she'd recognized that grief. Now, looking at her community knit together, reading the poem seemed wrong. She wanted to use her own words. She took a deep breath and her voice shook, but she managed to say, "Everything makes me think of you, Clay." And it was true. She felt as if he was right there in the room and he was the one she was talking to. "I can't do anything without thinking of you." She looked at the people. "My brother had the best heart of anyone I know. He was always doing things for people. He never judged anyone. He was always there for me until now." And at that moment, someone says, "Don't forget, it was your brother driving. He's to blame." "He wasn't as drunk as the others," Jordan snapped. It was true that Clay had been driving, but all the boys had been drinking, and while blood alcohol for each of them was above the legal limit, Clay's was just barely so. This was the only explanation for Clay driving Tim's car and Tony leaving his truck and also getting in. Still, no one could understand the speed at which the vehicle had crashed down the hill. Why had Clay been driving at such speed? Why hadn't he hit the brakes before they flew into the tree and burst into flames? So there's a big reaction that people have at this memorial service, and it becomes clear to Jordan as well as to her parents that the town in their grief has galvanized and is blaming them for the death of the three boys. And so that's initially at the very beginning of the book how it starts. I have
It's,
one more.
it's surprising to me to hear you read these because it is so true to all of those kind of experiences we have with death and with funerals and memorial services. This is so real what you're writing. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. um, for me, that is one of the joys of writing, I will say, and was one of the joys of writing this book, how that as I dug deeper into the emotions, starting first with the main character, I realized how much universal experience um, existed in the relationships of these characters to each other and in their family, in their community. Um, and so that sort of enriched, as I was writing, for me, the drama of what was happening on the surface. So I thought I might just read one more little snippet, And that comes at the beginning of the next chapter and has to do actually with the where the title of the book came from, Gravity Hill. So I thought I would just introduce readers to Gravity Hill. So this takes place the next night. Jordan found the accident site between the bridge and the bottom of Gravity Hill, the place where Clay had died. She was on her way home from work, and having avoided it since Clay's death, she wanted to sit for a while by the river and hear the water. Almost every first date in town started or ended at Gravity Hill. The hill wasn't really a hill at all, if you believe the scientists, rather an optical illusion of a hill created by a false horizon, a slight downhill slope that appeared to be an uphill slope. But it didn't feel like an illusion to Jordan. 3 white crosses glowed in the dark, and bunches of dead flowers lay in a heap. In one hand, Jordan carried a warm beer, and in the other, a pack of peanuts. The moon made a silver path across the quanduk's surface. The peanut shells made no sound as they fell away from her hand and floated like tiny boats. She and Clay loved the river. All the kids did. From downriver, a light plunged out and showed on the water. Then there was a splash, and a bobber surfaced and floated. Often there were fishermen at night shining trout, the beam of flashlight illuminating the fish. She wanted to be alone, and at the same time, it wasn't helping her find the comfort and strength she was seeking. She broke more peanuts and flung the shells in the bushes out of courtesy to the fishermen. You stupid Clay. She removed the long sleeve flannel shirt that she wore at the glass factory to protect her arms from the hot bottles and tossed it aside. The night was warm and the air felt good against her skin. Underneath, she wore a plain white t-shirt, which had come untucked from her jeans. The jeans were stiff and uncomfortable, one of the several pairs she'd bought for the factory. She took off her steel-toed work boots and socks, tossed them near the flannel shirt, and sunk her toes in the water. The light of the fishermen moved closer upstream, but Jordan heard no sound until a fish broke the surface with a splash. Then she saw the line play like silver thread being pulled through the water, and a moment later a trout arced in the air, gleaming in the light as the fishermen pulled it to shore. The burn mark from the accident started high up on the trunk of the oak tree, which towered over all the others. There was no undergrowth there. It would have burned away in the fire. There was a rustling in the brush. Jordan thought it was probably a deer who, smelling her, would now skirt around the clearing. She watched the spot, hoping to catch a glimpse of it when the fishermen emerged into the clearing. And we'll let that be there. Thank you.
Um, I have a question about creating the characters. You say this character came to you. How did you start with, I mean, you said that it began with Jordan, the character, the lead character.
Well, it started the chapter that is at the beginning of the book, which starts at a glass factory, is actually the scene that I saw first. And I've read somewhere about Raymond Carver, the first sort of postmodern short story writer in America, said that that oftentimes he would hear the first line of a story, and he gave an example of a story where the vacuum was running, and that was the first line of the story. For me, oftentimes when I'm writing, things come to me like just on really like a film, sort of cinema. And I saw the character in the glass factory and doing the things that she's doing in that very first section, you know, throwing bottles into boxes and being really angry. And so that piece, which the first chapter was first published as a short story, and then it was as if the character kept tapping me on the shoulder saying, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. I have more to say. There's more to this story. And so that was how it got
And
started.
we're always hearing about write what you know. And
Yeah.
there's so many things in this book that I was like, glass factory. How did she know about the glass factory? How did she know about the farm work? How did she know? I mean, so did you do research on these things, or are they part of your background, or?
Both. So there are some things like there's an environmental subplot to the book,
Mhm.
and that environmental subplot is loosely based on something that actually did happen in my hometown, which is Sterling, Connecticut. And so I did a lot of research so that I could understand the science of what was going on in that part of the story. The glass factory, I worked at a glass factory, and the glass factory since moved out of the state. It was part of, a much larger, um, corporation, and so they shifted all of their operations down south. But even once I went back and I did some more research because the culture of that sort of rural America losing its base of manufacturing, losing the wages in small towns that keep the fiber of a town together became part of the plot. And those were things that as a young person, when I worked in this glass factory, I never thought about that. I was just thinking about, earning the money that I needed to go to college. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I love those scenes, and it is obvious to me that you were from that area, and there really is a Gravity Hill, isn't there?
Yeah. Yes, there's a Gravity Hill. There are 200 or so gravitational sites around the country, and I've often thought it would be really fun to like just get in a truck and go do readings of Gravity Hill at these various gravitational sites across the country. I just really want to do that. Um, but this Gravity Hill is a real place in Sterling, Connecticut. Connecticut Magazine did a feature on it about a year ago. So that was something.
So that's kind of cool that we have this, the name of the place.
Yeah.
And how important is the place to you? I mean, geographically, does it matter a lot, or what?
I like to think that the themes are universal, the themes of love and forgiveness and secrets that get buried under the surface and the kind of toxicity that can cause in a family, in a town, in a person. But I will say that this place is very dear to my heart, that most of my writing has sort of come from the fiber of this place. And that's where I have observed so much of human nature and humanity in a way that inspires the words to come to the page. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's obvious that there's more to the story than the story and the characters. There's this powerful sort of what do I want to say? There's a mission or a message, and it peeks its head out here and there, and you get a little bit of that community, that sense of community, and trying to make sense of who's who and what's what, and these like you say, powerful emotions. That's really, it's hard to write about those. That's a very challenging thing that you did.
Thank you so much for saying that, Rolanda. I will say that was the thing that both kept me writing and kept me at it for a long time, because sometimes I could feel that I could see what was going on at the surface, but I couldn't see why that was going on. And it meant really tapping deeply into the felt experience of characters' lives, and sitting there, which isn't always a comfortable place to be, but it was always a rewarding place. Yeah.
I admire this, that you can, I mean, it almost sounds like it's scary to me to think that you're hearing these voices in your head, right? But you really need to like play with that imagination, your
Yeah.
imagination, and work that imagination, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about it as the voice of imagination. So there was a time, perhaps when I was first writing, that it was hard. I felt sometimes as though I were writing around the rim because I often didn't want to go there myself. And it took other wise writers kind of sharing with me how we navigate our creative energy to know, that that there's purpose in it, and that it's not like really hearing voices. It's, in one's imagination, allowing that fictive world to kind of blossom within the imagination, if that makes sense.
That makes wonderful sense. I'm so glad you said that. Thank you. Now Kwajo is with us and he may have questions. Did you have any questions?
Not now. I'm writing everything down, so I'm okay.
You're taking
I'm
notes.
putting
Well,
everything on paper. You saw me writing a lot.
well, Suzanne is a teacher, so
Yeah, he she
right? Are
is.
you still teaching?
Yes, yes. So I was at the community college last semester, and I'm prepping now to teach art of the podcast class starting in June for the College of New Jersey.
Oh,
So
great.
yeah,
Wow.
Yeah,
yeah.
my question is, in case I finish putting things down, can I get someone to edit it for me? That's another thing.
Yeah. Well, if you're there, so let me answer that first in a
Okay.
general and practical way.
Okay,
So it is very important for writers when you have a draft done to get another set of eyes on it. People,
sure.
so the answer to your question directly is yes. And just so you know, there are different kinds of editors. There are people, and I do this, who are developmental editors who help writers as they're developing their work to know like where they need to develop scenes, or how the structure of the book can be tightened, how to get the plot and the characters intersecting more and the themes embedded. And then there are editors who are more line editors or copy editors. So for writers who feel like they really know that their story is holding together, and they only want someone to look at the kind of line editing to make sure commas are in the right place. And that's a different kind of editing. And there are editors to do that. And those are generally two different services. Um, so, and we can talk more. I don't know if we want to do that off camera about
Okay.
where those opportunities, and if you're interested, I can give you more information. I'm happy to.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Well, also in terms of editors, I mean, that can be daunting to someone who's written something and can you just get a friend to read it? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yes. As a matter, people, one of the, if you're not familiar, there is the Connecticut Author and Publisher Association, and that is a very active, fantastic group here in Connecticut. I think the membership is like $49 a year. It's very reasonable, and they have uh different sort of, you know, there's one in Avon. They meet, I think, once a month, and then maybe one in Wellington or Vernon, and one on another side of the state. But they have a website. And so uh, that's a good community of writers, and it's worth going to one of their meetings, whichever one is local and, that works with your schedule, and sort of making connections with other writers. And you can make an announcement that you've got a manuscript and that you're looking for a writing partner, or a writing group. Because I will say that's one of the things that, being sort of a good, what we call citizen within the literary world is really important. So, if you're asking someone to take that kind of time, and you want to then also be a good citizen, and and give that same sort of feedback to another writer, or they may be able at one of those meetings to just let you know where there are local writing groups that have gotten germinated from the Connecticut Author and Publisher Association. So those are places where you can absolutely get some, some people to look and to do it for free. And there are online resources too. I'm less familiar I think there are some, if you Google this, there are some online places I know that meet and they ask people to like post 5 pages, each post 5 pages, and so then you can be getting some feedback on 5 pages. But it's not the same thing as taking your whole manuscript and getting somebody to look at that. So if you already have the whole manuscript, then going to the Connecticut Author and Publisher Association meeting would be the best way to make a good connection.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now,
Appreciate it.
is there anything else in terms, what would you say about self-publishing?
Yeah, I think self-publishing is a very viable option. So publishing, I know people say, oh, publishing, it's going down the drain, but honestly, there are just many options, and self-publishing is a really viable option. So the thing I would say about self-publishing is it requires someone to have a lot of time to then and willingness to also do their own marketing. So, and that can also be true when you publish with a small press that may not have resources for publicity. So, it's not just the self-published authors who are doing a lot of their own marketing. It can be the people who are published by small presses as well. So with the self-publishing, I would just look carefully, because there are a number of self-publishing options, and you want to be sure, read the reviews for them. There will be plenty of reviews, and read what other writers say. I've had people, and I don't want to name any of these, but I've had people tell me that they had experiences that once they decided to self-publish, they were given one amount, but then they didn't realize they were going to have to pay more for the company to do layout, or more for them to do this or that. So you want to see what you're paying for. Those components should be broken down in a very transparent way, and knowing just reading the reviews to see what other authors have felt about the various publishers. So the thing that is great about self-publishing is then you can get your story out there. You don't have to wait the typical 18 months, which is what it typically takes once a traditional press takes your book, 18 months to get through the whole editorial process. So you can get the book ready, and you can be in control of your own cover design. But then you just want to be ready to do the marketing. Like,
Marketing.
you want to go to literary festivals? Do you want to sign up for towns have different kinds of events? They'll some of the farmers markets, or holiday craft shows will look for authors to have booths there. So when you are self-published, then all that profit is yours. So you can decide to buy a table at a holiday craft fair to have your book at a table for $25, and you may only need to sell one book to make that worthwhile, where someone who's traditionally published and only getting a small fraction of the profit from their book has to sell a lot more books to make that worthwhile. So, I've heard some just fantastic stories of people who just sold, and you can also sell books online. There's so many ways that you can use social media and building a platform that way to sell your books online, and I think it's a very viable option.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
This is
Mhm.
wonderful. Quadjo, do you have any other questions or concerns?
Yeah, I think I'm okay. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, too.
So, I think this is a good spot to end it in, and I thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome, Roland.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the insight. I'm very much. I appreciate everything you've given me so far.
Oh, well,
And,
you're very welcome. I wish you all the best with your work, and
thank you.
just know there are lots of communities out there. So
Yeah.
as soon as you take one step for, if it is with the Connecticut Author and Publisher Association, then the world will start to open up even more and more.
Thank you. Yeah, I've written them now. I'll
Yeah,
find out from them. Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association.
Yeah.
thank you again, and I'm going to end this meeting, but we'll be able to, I'll end the recording, okay?